taking the time to join us again for such an important conversation. This evening, we're going to begin with a general overview of the socio-ecological model. Last week, I didn't really go into too much detail about the model, but I think we need to do so because this model really guides us through actionable ways to address racial inequalities. After the model overview, Lynette will give us a recap of last week and solicit our community, and that's you, for additional items that we may want to include before we transition over to the interpersonal level of the model. We have Jill Peltzer and Gina Johnson joining us today. They will give a brief overview of the model. We also have Christina Bridges back with us, as well as Liz Monks. I think she's on today, who helped get the initial conversation started a few weeks ago. Liz helped us do that. We also have Kim Connolly, who will be keeping an eye on the chat for us. And we have Christy Frail, who will be capturing our thoughts. So I am going to have Jill and Gina to take it away. Are you able to see my screen? Yes, okay, thank you, Kim. Yeah. Jill and Gina?
Great, well, thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about the social ecological model. So the model was developed, I think it was in the 1970s, to consider how we can provide health promotion interventions for individuals. And as you can see, the model, and I'm going to call it the SEM, embeds individuals within the larger social systems, with each level as spheres of influences on the individual's health behaviors and health outcomes. So the SEM is usually depicted with the most inner circle as the individual level, and then the outer rings, again, as those spheres of influence from interpersonal to social level as the broadest. So just taking apart each of the levels and describing them briefly. At the individual level, personal traits and characteristics such as economic status, educational level, influence a person's knowledge, skills, attitudes, and behaviors. And those factors are important to consider when constructing public health strategies, such as characteristics like economic status that are linked to an individual's ability to access healthcare or to be able to engage in health promotion behaviors. The interpersonal level includes the social networks such as families, friends, and traditions that can contribute to a person's knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. So our attitudes and our behaviors are not isolated, and they are impacted, of course, from by our family values, the cultural values and norms that we may have grown up with. So you can see that there is this interconnection between the individual and interpersonal, and that carries through all of the different levels. At the organizational level, organizations are instrumental in development of behaviors because they can often enforce behavior determining regulations or restrictions. So a school, for example, can control the dissemination of knowledge that will impact our own knowledge, our attitudes, and our behaviors. The community level focuses on the networks between organizations and institutions that make up the greater community. And those can include businesses or functions of that built environment, such as neighborhoods or parks. And the community structures are important in determining how populations, communities behave and customs that they may uphold. And then that broadest level is the social policy environment that includes the policies and the laws at the local, at regional, national, and even global levels that have the potential to impact large numbers of people. So the multiple levels are interactive and they're reinforcing. So for example, the social, physical, and cultural factors within these multiple levels can have a cumulative effect on health, behavior, and health outcomes. They're multi-layered because institutions and neighborhoods are embedded within larger social and economic structures, and those social and environmental contexts influence the health of individual people differently depending on their unique beliefs and practices. So when we think about specifically health improvements, we want to target all of the different levels as much as we can simultaneously because they are interconnected. So I'm going to turn it over to Gina now to talk a little bit more about that interconnectedness.
Thanks, Jill. I think one of the things that when I think about the socio-ecological model, I think it supports everything that all of us do all of the time. And when we talk about being a health promoting institution, a health promoting community, we have to think about the way we promote health education, the way we talk about health promotion within the environment. But we also have to think about education and health promotion as being inextricably connected to this model. So if we're offering health education, health promotion using an evidence-based approach, we can't simply apply a one-size-fits-all mentality. For example, as Jill was talking about at the individual level, I'm going to kind of walk you up the socio-ecological model as you see on the screen. As Jill mentioned, if we are doing health education in our community or providing health promotion, and you just take it at an individual level, you want to explore that person's knowledge, their attitudes, their skills, cultures, values, and their beliefs on acting on health, their ability to act on those health promoting behaviors. And then at the next level, at the interpersonal differences, do they have the support and social systems such as family, friends, and those social networks? And what are the organizational differences and community differences? I think about environmental conditions, the air, soil, and water quality. Are we really paying close attention to those things that really make up a system within a community? What is the noise level, community violence? Do they have access to food, housing? Are they living in segregated areas? What are the wages and benefits like? And then when we get to the public policy stage, those policies, what are those policies? What are in place to support individuals? Do the policies address racism, sexism, ableism, power, equity, inequality, and social justice and poverty? And I think it's at the public policy level that social justice and equity must roll down and hit at the very individual level in order that life itself can be sustainable. And one might say that the river that's flowing down from those policies right now is not life-giving. It is taking too many lives away, with more Black people likely to be exposed to COVID-19, maybe having less access to resources for protection. Once infected, more likely to die due to chronic disease and burden with less access to care. And as Dr. Camara Jones, she's the past president of the American Public Health Association, she stated in her call to action on racism is that we cannot disconnect the present from the past. We must understand the structures, policies, and practices and norms and values in order to take action, and action that's life-giving. Jill, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. That was a great overview. Thank you, Gina and Jill. Great overview of the socio-ecological model and how we can apply it to systemic racism, and how to be an anti-racist, because that is the topic. That's what we want to focus on, is helping to change systems through each of us, all the way up through the organizational and also the policy level. So now Dr. Sparkman-Morris is going to give us a recap of some of the action items that we talked about last week. And again, garner from you all, are there anything else are there other items that we want to add? And then we'll be able to shift to the interpersonal level to talk about some of the relationships with our friends and family and how to really become an anti-racist individual and help to move our organization and also society forward. Thank you, Dr. Sparkman-Morris.
Absolutely, and welcome to everyone who's on the call here. Thank you for coming back and being with us on today. As Dr. McGee said, I'm going to give us a recap really from our robust conversation last week. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the themes that came out of our conversation last week so that we can be very deliberate in moving to a place of anti-racism at KUMC. Okay, so the main themes from last week's conversation, I pretty much went through all of the comments in the chat and took notes about how we were discussing things last week, and I was able to break things down into some categories here. Gain knowledge and continue learning, continue the conversation, faculty and staff that departmental and administrative responsibility, community engagement, and legislative engagement or public policy type of engagement. So as we talk about gaining knowledge and continuing to learn, a lot of the themes that are a lot of the comments and the conversation we had last week really centered around gaining understanding of this goal of becoming anti-racist. What is anti-racist? So not just what it means to be racist, but what does it mean to be anti-racist as well? And how can we live that? How can that become a value? And we can live that here at KUMC. Also, understanding what the legacy of oppression looks like historically and here in 2020, and gaining knowledge and continuing to learn about what it means to be Black and a person of color overall, and particularly here at KUMC. We talked about some action items, and I thank you, Jill and Gina, for going over the social oh gracious, ecological.
It's ecological, yes.
What? I keep wanting to call it economic.
That's okay.
Social ecological model. And so we're going to talk about these themes really in terms of that model as well. And so we see here with gaining knowledge and continuing our learning process, we're really at this individual level of as far as action items go. So understanding the goal of becoming anti-racist. Individuals wanting to engage in unconscious bias training, really this call, and now just from the diversity cabinet meeting yesterday, today, my days are mixed up. Thank you. This call for everyone to engage in unconscious bias training. On the individual level, this desire, this call to want to attend community conversations, like the conversation we're having today, like the conversation we had last week, and also like community conversations we've had in the past, which were quite informational. And then I want to also highlight the community conversations that we've had that Christina Bridges has led about Turning the Page, the Turning the Page book club, where she's going to continue those. And I know Kim sent out reminders about those guided readings as Christina is going to lead those conversations on 3 books in particular: White Fragility, The New Jim Crow, and How to Be an Anti-Racist. On the individual level, there was also discussion about this action item about workshops on white fragility. And this is something through our department, Counseling and Ed Support Services, that the counseling staff, the white counseling staff, is going through a process of challenging themselves on their white fragility, being guided by Robin DiAngelo's book, and getting a series of workshops together to offer to the students initially. We also talked about several book suggestions, and there were so many book suggestions that were mentioned on the conversation as well as in the chat. And we are compiling those on a list, and they will be made available to you all soon. There were also several suggestions about documentaries and movies that would be helpful to watch. So that's what we're talking about with this theme of gaining knowledge and continuing to learn. So let's move on to this interpersonal level that we were just talking about. And that comes under the theme of let's keep talking. Let's continue this conversation. So many comments were made in the chat and verbalized last week about how people wanted to engage in this conversation and how important it is to do a both and approach. Of course, we want to move to action, and we must keep this conversation going. We can do both at the same time. And so again, community conversations, just like the one we're having here, we are engaging with each other, learning from each other, hearing from each other. Also, there was this challenge to have conversations inside and outside of your friend and family network. It's hard to really learn something when you keep having the same conversations with people who think the same way you think. As well, have conversations with people who are racially different from you. I remember very clearly one comment about get out of that echo box, get out of the echo chamber, which also leads to this point of, in continuing the conversation, engage in more immersive types of experiences. You don't have to stay with your neighborhood. You don't have to stay where you are most comfortable. We're blessed to live in a relatively diverse community, Kansas City metropolitan area. And so there are ample opportunities for us to learn from each other. So let's spend just a little bit of time here talking about faculty, staff, this departmental and administrative responsibility. And this can be seen in the model as more of an organizational level of action items. And when we're talking about this faculty staff type of responsibility, one of the things we absolutely want to do is move beyond even sending statements that are designed to just provide comfort or placate individuals or students, and move toward committing to some sort of action items that KUMC will take to be deliberately anti-racist. So some of those action items would be the deliberate recruitment of faculty and staff of color. Some of those action items would be to encourage conversations about racism and anti-racism within the departments, and have trainings and professional development for staff within those departments. As we talked about last week, just because a conversation is uncomfortable doesn't mean the conversation is wrong. In fact, it means that we need to lean into that discomfort. Another action item, deliberately integrating research about racism and health practice and policy into the academic curriculum. This has been a call for students and staff and faculty for a long, long time. I know some programs are doing this to an extent, but not all programs are doing this. And this was something that came up several times in our conversation. And finally, with this faculty staff departmental responsibility, there is a challenge to be a voice for justice and anti-racism within your professional academic organizations. So in your classroom and in those academic organizations, those professional organizations to which most of us belong to one or another.
Lynette, before you move on to community level, real quickly, I know that Dr. A, I know that you're on and you had a really important item for the individual level that you wanted to mention. And so I want to go to him real quickly, Lynette, so he can talk about that one real quick. And then I believe that I think Liz had an individual item that was also really important. So Dr. A and then Liz, if Liz is on.
Thank you very much, Dr. McGee. And I was on the last meeting last week, and I've been on this since the beginning. I really just want to start with saying a big thank you to all those who have found time to attend and how much this means to every one of us. Obviously, what we're talking about, people will experience at different levels depending on who you are, or your socioeconomic status, gender, color, name it, whichever way we have successfully found ways to divide ourselves. But at the end of it is the fact that all men are created equal. And that is one fact that the topic we're discussing has made us lose sight of. And in order to fully understand this, it again goes back to everything that has been said today and that was said last week, which is education. We need to really educate ourselves on how we got here. If we cannot trace our steps to getting here, it is difficult for us, and it will be very difficult to find the right steps to get out of this mess. In having these discussions, one of the things education would help you do is help you keep an open heart towards this discussion so that you can objectively see and feel the hurt of others. Primarily at the center of it is the sanctity of human life. We seem to have lost that. What has led us here is because of those so many lives that have been lost for absolutely preventable issues, issues that can be discussed, differences that can be resolved through other means other than killing ourselves. And it brings about, for me, the ultimate thing is love. Love for yourself and love for the other person. That is one missing thing that I think what I see more today is what you describe as conditional love. Love because of what you get from the other person, what you benefit from the other person, love that can be described at a particular point in time, whereas what we need is unconditional love for one another. Unconditional love has no definition but love. It does not see color, it does not see gender, it does not see size, it does not have any description, but just pure love for one another. One other thing I'm just going to mention is the more I read about this issue, the more I educate myself about this issue, the more the word systemic keeps coming up. It is a system. One person does not make up a system. An entire group of people make up a system. Today, I am sorry to say, one of that system is our leaders. Our leaders go up there making laws they claim to protect us in our best interest, to make us safe, to get rid of some people amongst us so that we can be okay. If they think they're doing this for us, they know they don't. They know they are not. But the more we keep quiet, the longer they will continue to do what they do. It is a system, and the system has been that of create fear amongst us to enable them legislate what they feel will make us safe. We then have a responsibility. I listened to this a lot last week. The responsibility is speak up and stand up to our leaders that you do not represent me with that law that has just been passed. Period. And for as long as that law remains, you will not get my vote the next time. Remember, all our legislators, the one thing they understand is, how do I keep my votes? How do I remain in office? We need to talk to them by the one thing they hold very dearly. We hold our own lives dearly. They hold their own positions dearly. We talk from the standpoint of our lives to let them know they will lose that position except they listen to us. This, I think, is one of the strongest tools we all have. And I have seen it play up several times. If someone comes and is harassing another person, wherever you are, think of how effective it is when everybody stands up and say, no, you do not represent us. You don't stand up for us. What you're doing is wrong. That person is quick to backing off. But as long as we all keep quiet or stand aloof and watch from a distance, the more they are empowered to keep up doing what they are doing. So we have some tools in our hands. And the first is learn to love one another unconditionally. Second, speak up to our leaders and let them know a good number of the legislations they pass do not represent us. My neighbor is not a threat to me. So please do not be passing laws that gets rid of my neighbor and just plants who you want next to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. A. I
you.
agree. Love is key, and it's really important in all of this at the individual level and the interpersonal level. So thank you for sharing how important love is. Dr. Sparkman Barnes?
Yes, was Beth going to say something before I went?
Maybe she was, sorry.
I'm here. Hi,
Okay.
everybody.
Hi, Liz, how are you? You had a very
Liz.
important piece, Liz, for the individual and interpersonal that you wanted to share, and I want to let you do that.
Yeah, definitely. The individual part of things, I think I just wanted to put a plug in. The unconditional love is an important piece, and I think also a little bit of unconditional love towards the self, and just a reminder that self-preservation is also okay right now. I mean, I think we're all talking a lot about changes that need to happen, things we need to do, things we need to keep focused on to keep the discussion moving forward. And I don't want to lose sight of, the fact that minority mental health is a whole area of study in and of itself, because minorities are at greater risk for like anxiety and depression just based on the experiences they have with racism and discrimination. And right now, I feel like those things are on 10 on 100. They're out of control right now. And I know this is the daily lived experience of many, many people, but I just felt like it was important to remind people. I know we talked about secondary trauma and vicarious trauma at the very first community conversation that we had. That's a real thing. Racial battle fatigue is a real phenomenon and experience, and all of this takes a toll on the psyche. I get it. I'm a psychologist. This is my bread and butter and soapbox. But I just want to remind everybody, and a colleague reminded me, this week, that we all know how to take care of ourselves. We know who our supports are. We know who to talk to. We know what to do. But I just wanted to remind people that, if you're check in with yourself and how you're doing, if you're experiencing more exhaustion or insomnia or headaches or physical symptoms, rashes, breakouts, grinding your teeth, whatever, check, all those things. Or, just noticing that you're more irritable, depressed, hopeless, helpless, avoiding work, avoiding colleagues, avoiding family, avoiding friends. I don't know, on some level, all of those things applicable to me at some point through all of this. So just a reminder to check in with yourself and do what you need to do to take care of yourself also. If there are other things that people can do to support you, that's great. But I think everyone is the expert on themselves. So just a reminder to check in, self-preserve. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. That's really important. Probably explains my tight jawness right now, but that we need to check in on ourselves. And I appreciate you saying that minority individuals, and especially Black individuals right now, are especially feeling this. So thank you for pointing that out. Thank you so much.
I thank you both, Dr. A and Liz, and I second and third and fourth that emotion. Okay.
Dr. Sparkman-Barnes, Mildred had a question before you move on. She said,
Oh, sure.
as we move from the individual level, should we encourage each other to come up with concrete personal goals and action items?
Absolutely.
I love that. Yes, Mildred, I love that. And because everybody has to take responsibility for themselves regarding this. You know, we hold people accountable, but if people don't first take personal responsibility, where's there going to be accountability?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Okay, where were we here? All right, just bear with me for a little bit longer and then I will be finished with this section of it. Let's talk a little bit more now about community engagement in that community level type of action. And I think Dr. A, as I go talk about community and legislative, I'm also going to get into some of what you were just talking about with us. And so first here we have support Black-owned businesses. Also research the businesses you patronize and become familiar with their policies and practices regarding race and discrimination. Be a voice for justice and anti-racism within your social organizations, your clubs, your school districts, your places of worship, et cetera, et cetera. I know my school district, they get sick of seeing me because I'm seemingly up there all the time. Follow social media of people of color and hold city officials accountable to get the stats that we need about police using excessive force and other forms of racism that occur right there within your city, your county, your area. And then that takes us to this legislative engagement, which pulls us to that public policy and remembering it doesn't happen linearly. It happens all together, it's fluid. So this public policy level, contact your elected officials on every level and get to know their position on anti-racism. We didn't have here, but I probably should have been here, put in here, vote, and vote on every level, from who's on your board of the utilities and your school board, all the way up to who sits in Oval Office. Work to get textbooks changed at all levels of education, and become involved with and sit on community commissions, boards, and committees, because we need to start learning how to develop and administer anti-racist policies and legislation. And so those were the major themes to come out of the conversation we had last week. I want to reiterate Liz's point about self-care, self-compassion, doing what you need to take care of yourself. I also want to reiterate that this is a both and approach. It's hard to just go to action if we don't continue to have these conversations. And we know that through these conversations, we're going to have to start some action as well.
Thank you, Lynette. I think we're going to go to Christina. Do you want to take us into, I guess we probably should talk with our community that's on with us and see if there are any other items that we need to add to the individual level before Christina helps us to transition into the interpersonal. But we've been talking about many of the levels. And so I think this is a good time to solicit additional items from our community. And if there are none, Christina, you can take us into ideas about more of the interpersonal level.
This is Jill. Really quickly, I do have an item, and it's probably, I think this is specifically for, and maybe this goes at the interpersonal level, I don't know, but for our white colleagues and friends, I think it's really important that we don't expect our Black friends and colleagues to educate us. You know, when Liz was talking about the trauma and the secondary trauma, I think we can contribute to that, although it's not intentional, but we can contribute to that if we are expecting to be educated. And there's so many resources that we can, that are available to read about the history, the current state of events, and that we're not having to inadvertently harm our colleagues, our Black brothers and sisters. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Jill. I think that's an important item to add to the individual and interpersonal level. I agree that it's very important. Sure, yes.
If you don't mind, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I was talking with someone on the chat personally. This is very difficult for me. As a person and an African-American in community, this sounds like a kumbaya moment by, excuse my French, a bunch of white folks. And guys, we've been through this. I'm telling you that folks like myself are tired of having these conversations. We're tired. Things have happened time after time after time, and we're the only ones that are bearing the brunt of it. Now all of a sudden everybody wants to, oh, we want to help. Take action.
Take action.
It's very simple. Take action. Stop allowing the things that you see every day and you turn your head or put your head in the sand to continue. It's very simple. Every time that I have been pulled over, ostracized, there was someone white that was near that never said a word. It's very simple, guys. Stop the madness. Take action.
Thank you so much, Broderick, for saying that. I think so many of us feel that way. And I also want to add that, you know, the themes that we've been talking about in the slides that I showed, it's not reinventing the wheel. These are things that Black folks have been doing forever. And what's happened is that because people don't believe that everyone is created equally, these steps don't go anywhere with only Black folks taking those actions. And so, and I think it was either Jill or Gina that we were talking about earlier about co-conspirators. It's time for every white person here to be a co-conspirator.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lynette. Lynette, I'm going to, Jason, before I come to you, Lynette, I want you to give an example of this, like one thing that Black people have been doing a very long time, because you just spoke about that, and that's a really important piece.
Reading, reading, knowing the history, reading about what's going on, writing legislators, becoming involved in the community, continuing to keep this conversation going, talking to people in our departments about it, to be continuously shut down and told you shouldn't bring this up in the workplace. Everything that was on there. And I will say, maybe with the exception of social media, because social media hasn't been around all the time, but still we were using other forms to communicate, snail mail and other ways to communicate. Everything that we talked about is not a reinvention of the wheel. It's Black folks here on this meeting banging their head against the wall over and over and over again.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, Jason.
May I make a comment, please?
Oh, sure.
I just actually wanted to comment on a statement that I made last week, because I don't know who was on there. But one of the things that I said was that we'll have an issue with racism until white people recognize it as a problem that they need to solve and stop seeing it as a Black issue that they need to emphasize with.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tiffany. Very important piece. Very important statement. Thank you. Jason?
Thank you for the for allowing me to speak, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to sort of back up a little bit and try to put this in more a systemic perspective. Of course, you know, we're having this conversation because of the issues specifically with policing. And I think it's important to point out that policing began in the United States as a way to capture runaway slaves, but also out of the fear by whites that the slaves would arise during the night and slit their throats. They did not implement policing because they feared criminal behavior from their fellow white citizens, but because they knew that they had set up a system that abused and exploited human beings, and as is human nature, there would come a time when those people revolted. Not only have we inherited that system, but our challenge, I think, for all of us, and this isn't just, you know, about white folks, but it really is about all of us, is to realize and appreciate that everything we have as Americans, everything we enjoy as middle-class Westerners in a now globalized economic system continues to depend on the abuse and exploitation of others for our benefit. Although for most of us, this exploitation and abuse is largely kept hidden. But it occurs through our foreign policy. It occurs through our immigration policy. It occurs through all manner of different policies and actions that our government, that other Western European governments take in order to secure the wealth of the world for the concentrated 20% of the world's population. Mm-hmm. You know, and policing remains the primary tool of the state to protect that system, right? And I'm talking about everything from the food on our table that is secured by the abuse and exploitation of extremely poor farm workers, whose poverty is exploited to secure their poverty wage labor. The very land that we live on was only secured by the genocide of Native Americans to secure that land, and then the enslavement of Africans to tame it. And nearly all the consumer goods in between are also secured for us by some form of exploitation and often abuse of poor people around the world. So the systemic problem with policing is that police are charged with targeting only the type of antisocial behaviors that arise from poverty and inequality, as well as untreated mental health issues. They are not charged with policing the types of anti-social behaviors that arise from privilege, right? So if we truly want to reform policing, we have to stop asking the police to protect a larger global economic system of inequality. And to do that, we need to dismantle the global economic system that depends on the abuse and exploitation of the many for the benefit of the few. And that begins with each of us learning and realizing all the ways that people continue to be made to suffer in order to support our standard of living. And then we have to say, we are going to refuse to continue enjoying that privilege that only comes at the cost of the suffering of others.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. Beth, I know you wanted to make a quick comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Broderick said. You know, he said white people need to start doing something. And you may be asking yourself, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, are you supposed to make this big grand gesture, you know, now that we're being asked to take action? And I truly believe that one, we have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable when we see those microaggressions happen. And you can start small, like when you see someone wanting to touch a person of color's hair because of the texture and white people think it's cool or whatever, you know, and saying, hey, like, that's not appropriate. Let's, you know, not treat Black people like they're animals and petting their hair. Or, you know, when people make some sort of comment that is racist, you need to put that person in their place and say that it's inappropriate. Start small there if you don't know what to do. And then you can move up into those bigger actions if you're feeling like you don't know what to do in this moment of taking action.
Thank you, Beth. Other comments?
I might be redundant when I say this. Good evening. Another action that my white brothers and sisters can take is just arm themselves with knowledge and information about the history of our existence in this country. It's that simple. Get in touch with the timeline. Understand that this nation has systematically placed barriers, and you can mark time, whether it's slavery and then the end of that. Well, Reconstruction, Black codes, Jim Crow, segregation. This nation has spent a great deal of time, energy, and money to keep us from evolving as a race of people. It's like running a race and somebody gets 2 laps a head start. And so arm yourself with that information, and then ask yourself, how would you feel if this was you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really that simple. Ask you, if this was happening to you, how would you feel if this was happening to you? That every time you took a step forward, something happened that made you go 5 steps backwards. So that's where I start when I'm having these conversations.
Absolutely.
With my
I don't
friends.
think it's redundant, Darren.
Can I interrupt? Hey, Darren, can you tell?
Roger, hold on one second, Roger. Hold on
I'm
one
sorry.
second. It's okay. Darren, I want to say that it's not redundant. I think taking a look at the history and the timeline is really important. And actually, Dr. Akinwantan is actually going to do that for us in a lecture that we're going to schedule coming up soon, because it is important to look at the history. And even just like Dr. Jason Glenn said with policing and how it came about. So no, it's not redundant and it's very important. Broderick, I'm sorry.
No, you're good, my friend. So Darren, if you would, tell the story that you shared with us last night about the white person that aggressively attacked a police officer in comparison to what just happened in Atlanta with the taser.
Sure. If you haven't seen this video, and before I put it on my social media platform, I had to make sure that it was real, because I actually thought that maybe somebody was staging this, because when you have people that take selfies of them having their their knee on somebody's neck, and they think that's funny, and they post on social media mimicking the George Floyd murder, I'm not surprised at anything that I might see that people would do to prove a point. But this ended up being a real police stop in which a white man who was asked to get on the ground, started getting on the ground, got back up. The cop pulls out his taser. Eventually, he starts running towards the cop. And then he decides, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to get back in my car. And he turned his back on the cop. And then he turned around and the cop finally tased him when he tried to open his door. The taser obviously got his adrenaline going, and he began to chase the police officer for at least 300 feet. He chased him, and the cop ran from him. Then he tried, after he decided not to chase the police officer anymore, he tried to steal the police officer's vehicle. Still, he's alive.
Absolutely. I saw that.
Did you see that?
I saw that.
And then the coup de grace is the police officer allowed him to get back in his car, drive his car around so he could ram the police officer's vehicle. And yet he lives.
He lives.
I just
And
want to
we
connect.
wonder why Atlanta's a problem.
I just want to connect the dots, Darren, because that's what we miss, is connecting the dots, because people will see that story and be like, oh, look at that story. But connecting the dots is he was able to do all of this, and his car wasn't riddled with bullets. He wasn't shot coming toward the police officer. He wasn't shot in the back leaving the police officer. He is still alive. We have to start connecting the dots.
Right. And he's alive because he was white.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It is not a coincidence. It is not a coincidence.
No, it's not.
Right.
He's alive because he's white. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I'm a white woman, we as white mothers don't have to teach our white sons. My 2 sons are blonde-haired, blue-eyed boys, and I will never have to teach them, don't wear a do-rag in your car, don't wear a wife beater in your car, be respectful to police, like all of these things that Black mothers have to teach their Black sons at the age of 3 and 4. Like they have to teach their sons so young all of these things that they can't do in public because it will be misconstrued as being a criminal. And white boys don't have that problem. They get off whenever they commit a crime.
Right. Thank you.
Ma'am, I just wanted to add on to what Darren said at first. You were saying to educate yourself about our history since we've been in America. I think it's also to be important to educate yourself on the history of Black people before we were even brought to America. Because once you go that far back, you begin to dig and learn the truth, because a lot of what has been taught in history has been a lie. Black history has been whitewashed. So I think it's very important to go even further back to before America.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tiffany.
So, Dr. Maggie?
Yes.
This is Dr. Carrington again. I would add to what the role education plays in this. The real truth is you will learn something. You'd either learn it actively or you learn it passively. You either learn it yourself or you're told what to believe. And in talking about videos, I'll quickly share a video I watched, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, on how not educating yourself can really be very dangerous. These were all Caucasian kids and a Caucasian teacher. And she came in and told the kids, today we're going to talk about superiority and inferiority. And she said, we're going to go by the color of the eyes. If you're blue-eyed, you're the superior group. You're more intelligent, you're better. And today we're going to mark those with brown eyes and any other color of eyes with a black paper around their neck. And then within a matter of 30 minutes, you started to see separation in the class of all white kids. During break time, you just saw how all the blue-eyed kids seemed to gather around, make fun of the kids with the brown eyes, and unbelievably, there was just separation in the class. Eventually, 2 days later, she came back to class and said, I'm sorry, I misplaced it. No, I intended to say it was the brown eyes that was superior and the blue eyes were inferior. Just like magic, you could see the entire situation change immediately. The brown eye became more confident, felt more superior, would answer questions better in class, and would continue and continue. And at the end of the day, she called the class and said, I just want to illustrate to you how another person can make 2 friends hate one another just because the 2 friends don't really understand the other. And that, for me, was a clear description of where we are today. When you speak to many people who hate the others, why they do, they couldn't really tell you. It is because someone said he is going to do that. He is going to do that. Education is powerful. You do not want to try the results of ignorance. So when we're talking about educate yourself, you will understand the more you read where all the systemic things came about. You cannot think of all the laws that were passed. What amused me in all of these laws, be it Jim Crow, be it the statement of Stevens in Georgia, South Carolina, in Savannah, where he said men are not actually equal, one is superior to the other, or name it. As you go on, one of the things you understand is they talk to a people who have refused to educate themselves, and they succeeded in planting the seed of hatred and fear, which then gave them the weapon to do what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And that's where education is powerful. So I ask all of you, please educate yourself and understand that we're not different. The last time I read, every group of people had 23 pairs of chromosomes. We all have 2 eyes, we all have 2 hands, we have 2 legs. I have not seen any physical difference, except the difference that I read in the papers and I listen to other people tell us makes me different from the other person.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. A. So I want to encourage everyone to, the videos have been provided in the chat. So if you want to click on those, thank you, Ebony, and thank you, Christine, for providing those videos. I think we are able to walk away today with some good action items on the individual interpersonal level, and knowing that we need to continue the conversation, we need to continue to educate ourselves and really be honest about what we're dealing with today with policing, and also take a look at the history and the timeline of racism and systemic racism in the United States of America. It is 6:59, so we will continue this next week. And before we close out, are there any last comments from our individuals who have helped guide the session? I know, Christina, you didn't get to speak, but I would encourage you to close us out if you want to. If not, Dr. Sparkman Barnes or Kim Connolly, last comments?
Christina, can you add your be the anti-racist comment?
Sure. Thank you all. I've really appreciated all the comments tonight. We are going to start covering white fragility, and we are going to cover the new Jim Crow, and we're going to cover How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Last year we read Stamped from the Beginning together, and I think we could all do that again. I did have a quote I wanted to share, which speaks to, this is not about the kumbaya. This is not about just feeling within yourself that you think that all people are equal. It's about action. And this is from Beverly Daniel Tatum, and I think a lot of you probably read this, but it's, she says, I sometimes visualize the ongoing cycle of racism as a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt, and the person engaged in active racist behavior is identified with the ideology of white supremacy and is moving with it. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along to the same destination as those who are actively walking. Some bystanders will feel the motion, realize what's happening, and they will choose to actively turn around and walk in the opposite direction. But unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are actively anti-racist, then they will find themselves carried along with the others.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much. That's important. Darren, yes, you may say one last thing.
I put the, thank you, Geraldine.
Welcome.
I put the link in the chat, but I would encourage you, if you have not ever heard of this or read this, Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing. They were written in 1829, and he is the godfather of the police department in London, Scotland Yard. Of course, you do know their patrolmen still do not carry firearms. That was 200 years ago. Please, there are 9 principles that you will read, and the core of that document is the public trust. public trust, that policing should be guided by our trust in it, not us trusting them in the way that we have learned to, that we just kind of got to roll the dice. But they should not act in any way that we deem harmful. So please read that. It's not a long read. Sir Robert Peel's, I put the link in there, law enforcement partnership. It even came from a law enforcement organization, but nobody's using it. So I don't know what that means. But let's get familiar with it though, because it's something that if we put enough pressure on policing and police departments, law enforcement, they need to look at this. And I've talked to a lot of law enforcement officers and they don't know what it is. And it's a shame.
Yes, thank you, Darren. So our goal is to have all of these items, actionable items, on our diversity website. So we'll be working on that. And I want to thank you again. And we welcome you all back next week. We'll get that invitation out soon. Thank you so much. Have a
in this article, and I want you particularly to look at them.
Okay, I'll take a look at them.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Alexa,
Bye-bye.
so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.